this meeting of Dundee City Council's Scrutiny Committee, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the relevant item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Where items are for noting or where there is no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Would members of the press and public please not post messages in the chat? Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the meeting chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committee and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders apply to the proceedings and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries, convener, so I'll now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call for the minute. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much. I will now take a roll call for the minute, and I would ask if members would confirm they are present when I call their names. Bailey Keenan. Present. Bailey Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Bailey McPherson.
Good afternoon. Present.
Bailey Scott.
You're on mute,
Derek.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Bailey Roberts.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Lord Provost Curdell.
Present.
Yeah, and I've received apologies from Councillor Ilnacla, and I believe that Councillor Lynn is kindly attending as her substitute. Is Councillor Lynn present?
Yes, I'm here, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And lastly, Councillor Short. Councillor Short. Okay, I'll mark them as absent at this moment in time. Okay, that then takes you on to declarations of interest, and it's whether or not any members have any declarations to the content of the agenda as it stands. Okay, there being no declarations, it then takes you on to substantive items today, and item 2 is accounts and audit. And I believe that the convener has kindly agreed to a request for items 2B and C to be taken first. That then takes you on to item 2B, which is the external auditor's report. And I believe that Brian Howarth from Audit Scotland will be speaking to this item, which is for approval.
Okay, whenever you're ready then, Brian.
Thank you very much, convener. I'll start on page 199 of your papers. This is a covering letter from ourselves. It really just says that the audit's complete. It also has a paragraph in there which gives the opportunity of members to bring to our attention any issues at this stage which they may have regards fraud, significant events, or non-compliance with laws that they think should be brought to our attention. It's a requirement under auditing standards that we ask for that. And if anybody's got anything that they wish to raise with us, I'd ask them to do so in questions. Just to say in the covering letter, the other thing that's worth mentioning is the outstanding matters, which are at paragraph 9 in that outstanding letter on page 199 onwards, they've all been resolved. So we're in a very good position in terms of to move on to our annual audit report, which is on page 225 of your papers, and I'm happy just to move on to that, convener, if that's appropriate.
Billy McPherson, would you like your question answered now, or is she?
No, I was only meaning To be honest, Convener, I was only meaning after Brian had finished his contribution, so I'll wait till that Brian's concluded.
Okay then, Brian.
So our annual audit report is on page 225 of the papers. I'll just run through some of the key messages on this and the significant findings. The audit results in a clean audit opinion for both the council and the trusts. And I might ask my colleague Richard Smith to say a few words on the trusts as we go through this. In terms of significant findings, the main issues really on the accounts, the main changes that we've made to the unaudited accounts are around valuation issues. There's no income and expenditure or general fund effect from these changes, but there were some quite significant changes made to valuations, particularly around assets and around pension assets. These are detailed in Exhibit 3 of our report, just to highlight a few of these key ones. The requirement is that the policy of the council is to revalue assets, fixed building assets on a 5-yearly rolling basis. But there's also a requirement within the Code of Accounting Practice to look at a current cost valuation assessment at the end of each year. Now, obviously, in recent times, there's been quite high levels of inflation, and particularly building cost inflation, which is a key element to the valuation method. So we had a look at this, and it took we raised this quite early on with the council, and I think it's fair to say it took a long time for the valuation process to address this year-end assessment. We looked at a sample review of 4 very large high-value assets and identified quite significant changes in value in those. So we also undertook a review of a further 12 other assets, which identified some changes, but our result of all this was, after we adjusted for the known issues we had in these assets we looked at, our projections in the remaining assets that hadn't been reviewed were not considered material enough to warrant further changes or audit procedures. So we've identified and made some significant changes to the valuations of buildings. Sort of related to that is also the council house valuation. That's also 4 years since a full valuation was done. The council undertook a desktop valuation, which was only completed in September, and that resulted in an increase in value of council house dwellings of £75 million. The final big change in terms of valuation was the pension asset. Initially, the net pension asset was recognised at £306 million in the unaudited accounts. We questioned this with the actuary, and a few things really stood out about this valuation. One, it was a relatively high value compared to other councils. Secondly, the actuary's method of determining this seemed quite unusual compared to what we've seen in the other 2 actuaries that work within Scottish councils. And it also, I think the third thing is that valuation of the asset might imply that the council could have taken a 15-year pension holiday from contributions. So all of that seemed quite unusual to us. We questioned that, and the council questioned that with the actuary, and that resulted in a revised calculation. So the actual revision is down to 0 for the pension asset, with some unfunded liabilities, which are normal for the council, of 31 million. So there's a big adjustment made to that. So in total, amongst all those things, it resulted in valuation changes about 473 million. So quite a big change in terms of valuations. And those were the main things around the accounts. If I may, Convener, I'll just bring in Richard Smith. Richard is the auditor of the trusts within the council, and our report covers that as well. So I just want to ask Richard if he just wants to say any few words about the trust audits.
Yeah, it will just be a few words, because we don't, as you'd expect, we don't have that level of adjustments to the trust accounts. So yeah, just to confirm what Brian already said, that we issued unmodified opinions on the 4 trusts that are administered by the council this year. So that included Fleming Trust, which, although it existed previously, this is the first year that we've been required to audit that. There's only actually one issue arising from the audit of the trust that we need to bring to your attention. So that's shown in Exhibit 6 on page 241. And that related to an error in the valuation of the Camperdown estate and unaudited accounts. However, that error has been corrected in the audited accounts, as shown in the resolution column, Exhibit 6. So that's really just reported for members' information, as it exceeded our reporting threshold. And the only other thing to bring to members' attention that may be familiar is that paragraphs 26 and 27 reiterate our recommendation from prior years that the trustees of the Dundee Trust should consider the future use of this trust, as it no longer holds any assets or has any activity over the last 3 years. So this recommendation is included at Appendix 1. I think per OSCA's guidance, if a trust has no activity for 5 years, they would then consider it dormant. I would expect the trustees to look at winding up the trust. So it's up to 3 years now, so it probably is becoming a bit more pressing that trustees consider. I think when we previously raised this 2 years ago, there's a suggestion that this trust might be used for future activity, but that obviously hasn't happened yet. So it'll be something for the trustees to consider if it's going to be used going forward to, I suppose, commence that activity, and if not, to proceed with winding up the trust. But that was all I wanted to say, Brian, on the trust.
So if I can just say something about the non-accounts side of our audit work. We obviously look at much wider areas than just the accounts. One of those is financial management. We note within the report that the council overspent by 5.4 million. This was met from reserves. On page 251 of the papers, Exhibit 10 shows the reduction in usable reserves from 81 million down to 76 million, reflecting that kind of change. We also note on page 244, paragraph 38, some of the continued capital slippage that the council has seen over many years. But we do note the action by the council to revise its capital planning last November. And we're kind of moving forward with recommendations with the council in terms of looking at that more closely going forward. Just in terms of the financial outlook, looking forward to this financial year and beyond. There's obviously a planned use of reserves this year of around 4 million and savings plans of around 5 million for the current year. We're happy to note that the council has a good financial plan over the medium term, and that the funding gap for 24-25 is about £12 million. We cover that on page 252 of the papers, paragraph 63. The only other area to touch on really is the wider code stuff around our best value reporting. The City Governance Committee, our best value thematic report, took that report in August 2023, just this August. I don't intend to repeat all the messages within that, but I understand there's a possibility that the thematic report will come back to the Audit Committee at a future date. I'm happy to take questions on any detail within that, but there is a much more detailed report, which, as I say, was taken to the City Governance report in August. So thank you very much, Convener. I just want to stop there. Thank officers very much for their interaction with us and the patience with us in terms of getting to this stage, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yep, I noticed the Chief Exec's looking to come in, so I'll bring him in before yourself, Billy McPherson. Greg. You're on mute, Greg. Still on mute. No, can't hear you. We give him a minute, see if he's going to come back in. Okay. Just show, you're off mute now. I'm not sure we're hearing you. Still not hearing you.
Convener, can you hear me now?
Certainly can.
Okay, apologies. My IT is having challenges in my room. It was just following on from Brian's comments and to confirm that it is my intention to bring back the best value report to the next Scrutiny Committee so members can review that report and scrutinise officers and seek further information if needed. So that will come back to the next Scrutiny meeting, Convener.
Okay. Billy McPherson then.
Thanks, Convener. Could I, first of all, and I'm sure all other members of the committee will agree, that we're very grateful to Brian and Richard, not just for the contributions this afternoon, but obviously for all the work that goes into the audit, and for that matter to all council officers in relation to finalising the 22-23 annual accounts, because it's a very significant piece of work. I'm sure we're all agreed by the hundreds of pages that we have before us. I'm very grateful to officers and indeed our auditors, both internal and external for that matter, for all the work that goes into it. My question's really around the point Richard made regarding the Dundee trusts, and the question's more to officers in relation to that particular issue. As Richard alluded to, it's had no assets since the end of the 2019-2020 financial year, when it's the funds it had were donated to the Lord Provost's charity fund at that point. I was just really wondering, from an officer perspective, has the matter of the long-term future of the trust been discussed with the trustees, given particularly what Richard said about there is a bit of a ticking clock in relation to when, in terms of good practice, you would decide whether or not you wanted to wind up the trust? And if it's not intended to wind up the trust, I assume that would be because long-term there may be a purpose in retaining the Dundee Trust for possible future use. And I was just really wondering if officers had a view on that, and as I say, specifically, if the matter has been discussed with the trustees.
I noticed the Chief Executive for his hand up, so Greg.
So Kevin, if I may come in on that.
No,
so
Robert.
To answer Billy McPherson's, we haven't yet reached a conclusion on that. We have actually just convened or scheduled an officer meeting to look at options and look at whether or not we believe there are reasons we want to keep it open. And once we have done that, then we'll obviously go back to trustees in the first instance with those options and with, if relevant, recommendations from officers to how go those forward. We're mindful of the timescale, so we'll be looking to have that concluded within this year.
That's very helpful. I would just say, Robert, once, obviously it's appropriate, it's discussed with the trustees before it goes any place further, but once the trustees have made a decision on that, it would just be helpful if all elected members are advised of what the long-term decision is going to be. But I'm grateful for your response, Robert.
Okay, President, have you any further questions? Okay,
not on the audit part, thanks. No.
Okay, can I maybe ask the question in relation to audit? Did the auditors consider that with the property being undervalued, that the chances are anything we're selling is we're selling at a price that's underpitched, or are we fairly confident that we're getting maximum money for the sale of any asset?
I think there's two slightly different things going on there. In terms of the valuation process, because assets that generally a council owns are not held to be sold and traded, they are held for the greater public interest and to generate services. The valuation method actually is what we call a depreciated replacement cost. So it's got a specific way of working out, or a pretty specific way of working out what the valuation is under that. When it comes to selling an asset, obviously what that is subject to is open market valuation and open market sales. So you can get differences between what the carrying value of an asset and what a market value asset sale is. We do look at asset sales on a year-to-year basis. It's not typical for a council to have significant sales year on year. But we do look, for example, to see that once a council has decided to sell an asset, that it undertakes a market value assessment of that asset before the sale. So we should see things when they are about to be sold, being sold for a value which is typically relative to the actual valuation it's carried out by the time it's sold. So we do some work on that, but it's not a massive part because there's not a great deal of turnover in assets. And as I say, the carrying value valuation is very different on the basis on which it's done. A bit of a long-winded answer, sorry, but I can go into a bit more detail if you want.
In relation to the pension and its valuation, I know that Barnett's Waddington, I think we use, have obviously in training told us that they use a different method to calculate than many other companies do. And it's probably always served reasonably well, given that, you know, our annual contribution has been less than many other councils. and we still managed to cope with obviously paying out pensions. But given that there is a number of others, do you think that we're likely to see a reduction in triennial evaluation and employer contribution, given that you were considering that where it was valued we could have taken a 15-year holiday?
I would say it's too early to say on the basis of the valuation that's done for the accounts by the actuary on an IAS 19 basis. That's the accounting standard that covers that. Is a different basis from what you get for the triennial valuation. That's why if you look at a triennial valuation versus an IAS 19 accounts valuation, it's a slightly, well, it can be quite a different figure. So I think it's too early to say on the basis of the IAS 19 whether there's any chance to reduce contributions going forward or not. I would say wait and see for the triennial valuation would be my advice, probably to members. I think that the issue that was unusual this year that came to a head is this is the first year for, as long as I can really remember, that most councils ended up with a pension asset on their books rather than the pension liability. So a whole new raft of auditing standards come into play when you've got a pension asset as to whether the council can recognise that asset. It's based on an actuary's assessment, but I think it's fair to say that the professional guidance around that assessment could be a lot clearer than it actually is. And I think that resulted in different interpretations between actuaries. I would say that the Barnett-Waddington initial assessment of it, and they did offer they could do it under a different basis than they actually did initially. But the initial assessment was odd in some ways in that it compared 1 year contributions with multi-year costs. It seemed out of kilter, and that was confirmed when you looked at other actuaries that did the same sort of calculation but on a very different basis or came up with a very different result. As I say, I'm glad to say that Barnett-Waddington, when they were approached, revised that calculation very quickly, but it did make a big swing in the pension valuation for the accounts. But I would say wait and see what happens to the triennial valuation before making any judgments really about, and take advice on whether there's a position where pension contributions can be reduced going forward. Some other pension funds, I think, have already got to that stage, but I don't know the position across Scotland.
Okay, thanks for that. I noticed either Greg or Robert's going to come in as well.
Thank you, Gavina. Just to say, we expect to get the triennial valuation in November, and obviously we'll share the outcome of that with members, because that obviously will be an important factor potentially in our budget for next year, particularly if there is a reduction in contributions. That would be welcome from a budget perspective, but we don't know yet, and we'll share that with you. As you say, we're expecting it sort of mid-November.
Yeah. Can I maybe just seen Camperdown Estate was mentioned? Can I maybe ask that when we decided to close the golf course, whether we took into account that we were likely to lose the golf club and the rental income at the time? And can I ask how the building is maintained, given that, it would appear that, if it's part of ours, we should be looking after it, given that it would be, a charitable contribution into the city if it was rented out. Greg?
Yeah, thanks, convener. So I'm not sure, convener, if that's a question for officers rather than Audit Scotland.
It was for officers based on it was Audit Scotland that mentioned it, so it'd be easier just to do it now than wade through it with the papers.
Absolutely. So we can maybe ask Robin Presswood, who's on the call, just to come in regarding Camperdown, and if there's any other officer that wants to come in response to your question to highlight to yourself, convener.
Thanks.
Many thanks, convener. In terms of the rationale for the original business case, I do not recall, I wasn't involved in that, so I don't have any immediate knowledge of whether or not that was factored in. The current property running costs for Camperdown House and the golf club are met from within the General Services Corporate Property account, which is managed by City city development on behalf of the whole council. Our view is that it's better to market the house as a whole rather than marketing the golf club and the Camperdown House building separately for obvious reasons. We are promoting Camperdown House as a whole, and we're also particularly keen to secure an occupier for the golf course as well to bring that back to life. Members will recall a previous confidential report on that. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to conclude that interest, so the property remains on the market, and we're very keen to receive further interests, which hopefully will lead to a tangible commercial property opportunity in the future.
Can we maybe come back and confirm whether the golf course and the rental income was ever taken into account when it was decided to close the golf course? Just by way of, you know, just lost another bit of income that stirs money around the council pot and may not necessarily may have affected the business case at the time. The other one is that given that it lies empty now, what sort of decay goes on in the building that would have previously been heated and used by, at least part of it heated and used by the golf course?
Chair, in terms of the business case, that would be for Leisure and Culture Dundee to respond. I'm not sure whether Mrs. Dobby is on the call. But in terms of the property aspect, the building is maintained. We've continued to maintain both the house and the golf club as required. Clearly, the building as a whole is a Grade A listed building, and we have a duty to ensure that there's no further deterioration in terms of the property. I think, as you say, the best way to secure a listed building is to ensure an occupier and officers are working as hard as possible to do that.
Okay, Judy.
Thanks, convener. If I can undertake to find that information out, I wasn't involved with the original, excuse me, business case for that was put forward for the closure of Camperdown Golf, but I'll find the information out and come back to the committee for that.
Will somebody be able to tell what the rental income for the club was as well? So is that to compare with?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, we'll move on then. Bailey Scott.
I have a couple of questions, convener, but I don't know whether they're for Brian or whether they're for Robert in his response to the audit. But I'll ask him anyway, and whoever can pick them up. My first one was in respect of the adjustment that's been made for the valuation of the assets held by the council, and I note, Brian, and in the report it says that there's no impact on the general fund for 2022-23 or the reserves either, but going forward, is there likely to be an impact, for instance, in the reserves that we have for inflationary pressures? Is there likely to be an increase in that reserve in the next financial year because of the increase in the value of the assets? That'd be my first question.
Yeah, Robert.
Thank you, convener. So the short answer, Derek, is no, this isn't going to impact on the operating revenue budget of the council. This is about the carrying value of assets on our balance sheet, and we'll be working with Brian to get slightly ahead of this for next year to make sure we're not in the position where he's having to make adjustments in relation to the value. There is actually a valuation of council housing, for example, planned for next year, so some of that will be addressed in the ordinary course of events. But the short answer is this isn't going to have an impact on the revenue budget and the provisions that we make in revenue reserves rather than asset values.
Okay. And then my only other question was in relation to the recommendation 4, I think it is, about the services were slow to respond to internal audit reports during the year. That's something that members of the Scrutiny Committee have been raising on a number of occasions over the years. And now that it's been picked up by the auditors, I take it we will really have a hard push on making sure that those internal audit reports are all actioned seamlessly. So when we get the annual report from the internal auditor each year, there will be quite clear that they've all been actioned.
Robert.
So thank you, convener. And thank you for the question, councillor. This has already been raised through CLT by the chief executive, and we've now got the risk and assurance board looking routinely at responses and the programme for internal audit work, so we can provide you that with that assurance for future years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. There doesn't appear to be any further questions in relation to Audit Scotland's report then, so can that be agreed? Okay, Willie, we'll move on to 2C, is it?
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. That's correct. It's the response to the External Auditor's Annual Audit Report by Robert Emmett.
You looking to say anything on that, Robert, or have we just about covered it?
Convener, this is our response to the report and seeks authorization to sign off the accounts and publish them. I'm happy to take any questions that members have. Okay, well, hopefully there's no questions, but hopefully we'll get to the you're okay to sign off the accounts once we've grilled you on these. Can this report be agreed? Okay, that's agreed. Okay then, Willie.
Okay, thank you very much. It takes you back to the agenda as submitted. Next item is item 2A, the audited statement of accounts. The accounts are before you for approval. They're individually listed.
Okay, is there anyone looking to make a comment on them to start with, or shall we just go to questions?
Happy to go to questions, Convener.
Okay, well, Bailey McPherson.
Thanks, Convener. I have some questions regarding the information on page 13 and also in relation to senior employee remuneration on pages 40 to 41. In relation to question page 13, it's just really a couple of questions around the key developments listed during 2022-23. The first one being the number of people who completed the annual budget consultation survey, and that is listed as 572. And I was just really wondering if officers could really give some feedback. That, to my mind, is really quite a small number in relation to the number of council taxpayers in Dundee. And also, if we compare with frankly, I think we have a very good record in terms of rents consultation take-up, and which is significantly higher than that from a significantly smaller pool of tenants in relation to the number of council taxpayers. And I was just really wondering if officers have given any thought to steps that could be taken in future years that might result in a higher level of consultation response. As I say, I have a couple other questions, but they're unrelated to that, so I'll pause and get a response on that before I go on to the other two, if that's okay.
Okay, Robert.
Thank you, Convener. So we have taken some steps and we have done some work with communications to look at how we can promote better this year. And my understanding is we've already got a better return rate than that for this year at the moment. And one of the things we've done, things like, for example, look at can we promote it in libraries and make sure we've got signage up promoting it and providing alternative ways to participate. Happy to make sure that members have all seen details of what we are doing, and we'll be happy to reflect on that after this year and see if there's anything further we can do in future years.
Now that's very helpful, Robert. My other question is in relation to the next key development listed, which is Dundee's Voice. And I was just really wondering if one of the officers could give a view as to how successful that has been thus far and what the sort of take-up of it is.
Who's going first? Is it Elaine?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, sorry. I'll let
Greg, you first.
Sorry, I'll let the Chief Executive come in.
Okay.
Sorry, Convener. I was just about to ask Elaine Zwirling to come in on the question, so I'll pass to Elaine.
He saved you the trouble.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Bailey McPherson, for the question. I don't actually have the details of those figures available to me at this point in time, but I'm more than happy to collate that information and circulate that to Scrutiny Committee. Certainly get that to you as soon as I possibly can.
Perfectly happy with that. Thanks very much, Elaine. And my last question is about the information on pages 40 and 41, and that's about senior employees of the council. And the number, basically, it's the number earning more than 50,000 a year. And we've seen quite a increase in that between 2021-22 and 22-23 from 426 to 538. And I was just really wondering if officers could give an indication. Obviously, an ongoing issue which numerous elected members have mentioned over the years is the whole issue of flatter structures and promotion prospects as a result of flatter structures. I notice in particular there's a big jump in the number of persons in the 55 to 60 basically remuneration band, from just 60 in 2021 to 190 in 22-23, and some indication as to specifically, is that simply been the number of people who through the pay increase have jumped from the previous band to that band, if you know what I mean, but some narrative around why the overall increase would be very helpful indeed. My only concern, you know, people should be remunerated as appropriate for their level of seniority. I have no problem with that. The issue I've always felt, and I think other members feel as well, is about that issue of flat structures which can limit on occasion someone's promotion prospects.
Okay, it's Robert, is it?
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, Billy McPherson. So this is more about the fact that we've seen higher pay increases in recent years and people moving bands. And if you look at the way people have moved from the numbers in the 50 to 54 through to the band from 55 to 59, doesn't reflect a change in the organisational structures, but really a change in a shift in pay that's happened. And of course, the bands have remained the same, but pay doesn't necessarily keep pace with those. So that's where the changes in terms of the not a significant increase in the overall numbers, but in terms of a change in the bands that are largely driven by pay.
I sort of understand that, Robert, but I would point out that the increase in the lowest band is 85, but the increase in the next band up that I referred to is 130. So it doesn't quite explain it all if you follow my drift. But I'm happy to leave it at that just now, but it would be helpful perhaps if something was circulated, just giving a little bit more narrative about. I don't really want to put officers on the spot on this today, because I'm very conscious that I've picked out a few issues from a very long document. But if there's any further narrative that can be provided, I would appreciate it.
Convener, if I may. No, Convener, I'm happy to provide a summary of the changes because it will reflect where pay awards have been implemented. I'm happy to share that with members of the committee. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Is there any further questions, Billy McPherson? Okay, Billy Scott.
No, thanks.
Yeah, my first question was similar to the one just asked by Billy McPherson regarding the increase in the number of employees earning over £50,000 a year and the 112 increase in that figure. Before the meeting, I had gone online to try and see how we compared with other local authorities that sit in the family group that we're in for benchmarking purposes, and I couldn't find any. Presumably it's because the 2022-23 accounts still haven't been put online to allow me to do that. So if information is going to be brought back as per Bailey McPherson's request, then it might be useful if a bit of benchmarking could be done, just so we can compare ourselves against similar authorities as to the level of employees they have over the 50,000, earning over £50,000. The other question I wanted to ask was on the following page, on page 42, about trade union facility time, and the reason why there wasn't a robust ingathering of information in the previous year, because that's quite an increase of trade union officials that we weren't aware of. So I'd really like to know why we weren't aware of that, because presumably facility time, each trade union is allocated a number of hours facility time, and then the unions decide how to divide it up amongst their members depending on the roles that they have. And so team line managers and team leaders should be keeping an accurate account of the hours that are used by TU reps when they're carrying out trade union business using facility time. So I really want to know why that robust figure wasn't there, particularly in relation to 2021-22, the most recent figures there, that it shows we now have one employee using 100% of the working hours and facility time, but there wasn't one the previous year. I'm kind of thinking there probably was, and if there was, then why didn't the council know that it had a TU rep that was spending 100% of their working hours on facility time?
Okay, so Robert, are you looking to respond?
Thank you, Convener. If I can come in on that last point first. So it's for the trade unions to provide us with that information, Billy Scott, and we have had difficulty getting them to provide details of what work they do. They're obviously entitled to a certain amount of time to deal with employee matters, and I think the gaps in previous years are more to do with the fact that they haven't provided that with us with information, rather than we don't know that there is work going on as officers of the council. Through the trade union forum that we've been running, we've got better at collecting that information, and hopefully that will continue for future years.
Convener, if I can also just come in and say, just to provide Bailey Scott and committee with the assurance that trade union representatives do have an allocated time, and that is monitored by their line manager. In some cases, if there is any specific reason that the trade union needs to do additional work, then that will be considered and authorised where required. So I wouldn't want committee to think that there isn't controls in place. But as Mr Emmett has indicated, the formal process of gathering that information has took longer than what we would have wanted, but is included this year and will do so in future years when reporting on the annual accounts. Thanks, Convener.
Yeah. Billy Scott, have you any further questions?
That's fine, Convener. I have no issue at all with a facility time for TU reps. I just wanted to be sure that what was being collected was an accurate figure, and I'm pleased to hear that line managers are involved in the process of allocating the time and monitoring the amount of time that's taken off. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Bailey Wright.
Thank you. Page 10, the very last item, which is the Olympia. It's saying that you're on track to complete by October 23. I had a couple of constituencies inquiries this week about when the pool was opening. Do we have that?
Okay, is it Gregor?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I'm happy to answer Bailey Wright's question. So the information contained within the accounts relates to the handover of the building from the contractor back to the council that we are currently working with the contractor on. At this point, we're still looking at the operational aspect of what's needed to get the building open to the public, including staff training, which I know Leisure and Culture Dundee are actively underway. And once we have that date for opening, we will ensure that's communicated in the first instance to all elected members before it's denounced in the press. But at this point, I don't have the precise date yet, but we'll share that as soon as it's available, Bailey Wright.
That's good. It's just one of the queries was somebody who keeps paying some sort of fee for coming to the pool, and I was just wondering, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't be likely to happen, or am I wrong?
Judy?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Bailey Wright. We did put a lot of arrangements in place to make sure that we recognised the users that were solely Olympia users through the Leisure Active Membership Scheme. If you could ask, or if you could get in touch with me with the constituent details, I'll arrange for somebody to look into that in more detail, because you're right that in normal circumstances it shouldn't be that they're being penalised for the Olympia closure. We put measures in place to look at that.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. Can I maybe ask a couple of questions? One in relation to item 10, so saying it's sustainable transport. Is that £9 million worth of sustainable transport for hydrogen buses that we're going to have to hand back? And how was that reported to council? Because I can't recall that seeing anything to that effect. It could just be me, of course. Is that Robert? Greg?
Sorry, Convener, if I can come in first. So changes to sustainable transport have been reported in the capital monitoring. I can certainly look that out for you and provide it with you. Robin's perhaps best placed to provide an update on what's actually happened with the project itself, or happened with the project itself.
Yeah.
Chair, many thanks, Robert. Yes, confirmed that the hydrogen bus deployment project has been wound up. The technology provider experienced a change of ownership and therefore withdrew from the project. The project had been fully funded by Transport Scotland for its duration, and when the project was wound up, outstanding capital funds were returned to Scottish Government, so therefore there was no cost to the City Council. The allocation for capital within the capital programme was therefore allocated to other corporate priorities within the last or the penultimate capital programme review.
See when we applied for £9 million worth of project, would we have needed employees over a period of time? And if we did, what happened with them if we didn't have a need or whatever to continue with a project?
Chair, there were no specific employees recruited. There was a project manager who worked part-time on this project, but that was an external contractor that was fully funded by Transport Scotland. So there would have been council employees, including myself, involved in the steering group, but it was very much a part-time role rather than any substantial allocation of staff time.
Okay, I'll look forward to seeing how it was reported to. No sure it sort of flags up that we've got £9 million drifting in and out of council that we've really focused on at the extent we maybe should have. Can I ask about the next one down then, the sustainable low carbon projects, then why have we spent anything on that?
Convener, I don't know if Mr. Presswood can help with that one as well.
Chair, I think that will be a range of individual projects which have been basketed together under that heading. I'll need to come back to Bailey Keenan with a detailed breakdown and an update on progress for that.
I think point 30 in the document makes reference to assets for sale, but doesn't really give me a list of the assets that are for sale. What are the assets that are surplus and up for sale?
Chair, happy to pick that one up. The type of assets that are for sale could include land. We have a number of former school sites and we release them to the market as market conditions are right. And crucially, we want to manage an effective flow of sites onto the market rather than flooding the market with all of those properties at the same time. There may be former council buildings which are not required for council reuse, and an example might be, for example, Mitchell Street Centre, where the functions were relocated to the city centre. We have tried to dispose of that to the third sector unsuccessfully, and we now market it for consideration for any other project. The third and final category is operational economic development projects, which have been created for the purpose of job creation. That would include land such as that Claver House, which would only be released for a major job creating project, such as the two that have been approved in previous committees. So that gives you a sample of the type of assets we're trying to dispose of. They will generally be promoted via the council's website and the Invest in Dundee website, and some of them will be promoted through the council's retained surveyors as appropriate.
Thanks for that. Can maybe ask another question, and might not be someone's got the immediate answer for. Have we paid any ex gratia payments to anyone, like finders fees for to recruitment agencies for finding individuals? Have we paid any money in insurance fees to individuals that have had maybe had a trip or a fall, and ordinary members of the public? And have we paid any money out in relation to vehicle damage due to potholes? And where would that be seen in the accounts?
Convener, if I may.
Sure.
So I think it'd be best if we come back to you on those points. On the first one is the only one that I've got detailed knowledge in, that in terms of we don't pay a finder's fee in relation to recruitment. Sometimes we do use agencies, and sometimes we do get assistance with recruitment processes, but not in terms of a fee payable to the individual. I'm happy to come back to you on details of any payments we might have made in terms of liabilities separately. Happy to come back to members of the committee with that. I can maybe defer to Paul or Francois to let us know where any such costs would fall within the accounts.
Yeah, fine.
We can come back to you on that, actually, convener. That will probably be best.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that you're not paying finders fees, but I know in the past we have councils paid finders fees in the past to agencies for individuals that we've taken on. No, might have been a few years back before your time, Robert, but it certainly happened. Hence the reason I'm asking the question. I know someone else with a hand up there, but okay. There doesn't appear to be any further questions, so can the accounts be agreed? Okay, thanks very much for that. I'll allow you to sign them off then, Robert. Okay,
thank you, convener.
You're welcome. Willie.
Okay, thanks very much, convener. It takes you on to the Dundee City Council Charitable Trust accounts.
No questions on this report? Okay, is this report agreed? Okay, thank you for that.
We then have the Council Lord Provost of Dundee Charity Fund.
Any questions on the Lord Provost Charity? No, is that agreed? Thank you.
You also have the Dundee Trust, convener.
Any further questions on that?
And lastly, you have the Fleming Trust.
Any questions on the Fleming Trust? Okay, that would appear to be us then.
Okay, thank you very much, convener.
Thanks very much for your time. And
thank you.
Thanks for all the efforts, as Fraser mentioned earlier. Thanks for the efforts that are put into the audit and bringing the accounts together. It's very much appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, convener.
Goodbye.